So here's the experimental setup. I've got two boards, one with positive rake and one with negative rake. So here's just the question I've had in my head for the past few days. So the conventional wisdom is that, you know, zero rake has a really neutral, even turn, and you use positive rake if you want to make it more responsive and more turny, and that's what TKPs have, is this positive rake. And then you can have a flipped hanger, say with like a Randall or Paris, I believe. Flip the hanger and you go from positive rake to negative rake. You can have a little bit more stability, but it deadens the feel. And so a lot of people who want turny setups like to have the positive rake, and they steer away from no rake and negative rake, right? So then the question is, why the heck do all the super carvy Surfskate setups have a ton of negative rake? So one of the revelations we had years and years ago for making our setups, you know, more carvy and more responsive was adding this positive rake. And you know, I don't run a lot of zero rake trucks anymore because I like that engagement and I like that feel, and so it seems like there's a contradiction going on in Surfskate from the conventional wisdom. So I wanted to explore that with these setups here. So on the right, this is going to be the Surfskate stand-in. It's got the negative rake, which means it has positive trail. And you can see that here. I've got it on the Rojas. I've got a custom bushing I made, so it's got the very, very minimal resistance. And I've got a bumper here to limit the lean so it doesn't get bite very easily. And you can see this is basically the rotation axis. The steering axis is that pin. And you can see the axle is behind that axis. And so as you're moving forward, so you can see here, the pivot axis kind of points down into the ground in front of where the wheel touches the ground, and that's your trail, that distance there. And that trail is what makes it so that it has a deadened feel and a slower response, and it's less responsive, but it's more stable, right? See, I've also got, because I'm trying to emulate a Surfskate with this inquiry, I've got the Rojas wedged up to 60 degrees. So that's nice. That's the Surfskate stand-in negative rake. And then here's the positive rake. And it's the same thing, except the axle is flipped on the opposite side of the pivot axis. And so the axle stays in front of the pivot. Same. The one thing I did do is I've got a riser on this one to make it so that they're the same height, but the wedges are the same. So having positive or negative rake doesn't affect the turning radius of these at all. So these should have the exact same turning radius, except for just a little different because this moving the axle changes the wheelbase slightly. So the smaller wheelbase turns a tiny bit more. But aside from that, they should have the same turning radius. But one other effect of the positive or negative rake is it has a curious effect on the lateral side-to-side loading of the deck. So when you have the negative rake and you have the trail, sideways loading on the deck kind of feeds into the lean a little bit, and so it's easier to turn if you're putting energy sideways on the front. Whereas it doesn't work out that same way when you have the positive rake. So when you have the positive rake, and you push the board sideways, there's kind of an interference that's happening with the lateral loading of, so if you laterally load the wheels, so if I just push sideways on the wheels, it's going to try to turn right? But if I push sideways on the deck, it's going to try to turn the deck left and lean it left. So these two things kind of fight against each other, but on the negative rake, they kind of work together. So that's what's going on when you are kind of swaying or smearing with the front on a Surfskate. So I'm going to start off riding this one, the positive rake, because for me that's kind of the default. That's what I'm used to. On both these trucks, I've got no resistance in the rear and just minimal resistance in the front. And this is just so that I can feel what the mechanisms are doing and not what the resistance is doing. The resistance can kind of get in the way of understanding what's going on mechanically. So, all right, here we go, and I'll talk about what's going on. So first off, yes, it turns. I can pump with it. It's really easy to put energy into the system because it's got so much turn. It's got a certain stability at center, but when you lean and dip into the lean too far, whatever's going on that feels so comfortable at the top kind of breaks down, and that's a kind of that divey feel that rake gives you. It's easy to mess up and like suddenly fall into a turn deeper than you were intending. That means that you're holding yourself, you're pulling back with your ankles to keep yourself out of it. There's this phenomenon where you go too much, and see how the center of the wheel, of the left wheel you're turning over, is so close to the center of your deck, and it's like it's once you get to this point, there's, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like the board is tripping over itself. And I've done that a couple times where I'm pumping and it just kind of goes in and it doesn't come out, and I end up running it out because I get all messed up about it. So the way this pushes, it pushes pretty comfortably. I'm able to stay on top. It doesn't have the most comfortable micro steering. It's really sensitive, but I can stay vertically aligned over the balance point, and it goes straight pretty well. All right, now let's look at the negative rake setup. The pump feels very similar to me. I guess the difference is it feels a little bit more flexible. With the positive rake truck, I'm really pumping by going heel toe, heel toe, heel toe. Whereas on this, I don't have to be quite so heel toe about it. I don't have to be so conscious about that. I'm more conscious about the line that I'm following. There's something about it that's not quite as crisp feeling. It feels lower energy, like the system is less poppy, less wow, right? But it's moving. I'd say it's a lot easier to start the pump happening because you can rely on some sideways energy rather than just pushing your toes in because if you're trying to push your toes down, but also push the board the way your toes are pointed, that's a little more difficult thing to do. But you don't have to think about it when you've got the negative rake to help you, that trail. It's definitely got a more robust stability to it, and I feel like the top has less stability, and there's more happening in terms of feedback throughout the lean. It's got a similar problem where you go too far and it feels like the system breaks down and it kind of engulfs the wheel. All right, so in conclusion, the question was, why does Surfskate have a negative rake when it's a very active and lively discipline, when the conventional wisdom is that negative rake setups are less lively and more deadened? And yeah, the conclusion is that they are still less lively and more deadened, but that Surfskate has such a high pivot angle that they're a really active setup regardless of that. In addition to that, so the negative rake, what it contributes is it allows this side-to-side motion to contribute into the turn, but it doesn't seem to fundamentally change the setup to make it more or less pumpy. You know, even though you're putting energy in going side to side, you're still leaning the deck just as much to make that turn happen. It just allows you to engage with it differently, right? So mechanically, as far as the pump goes, the wheels are still doing the same thing against the pavement, and you're still getting the same turning angle for the same degree of lean. For stability, it's really interesting. On the reverse kingpin setup, not the reverse kingpin, the positive rake setup, it's got a nice return to center when you're at top, but it becomes tippy and hungry to turn as you lean. So you have to like keep it in control, and you have to hold it back from diving at times. Whereas the negative rake truck, the center is kind of more lazy. It's kind of got a lazy center. It's not positive, but as you lean into the turn more, it'll push you. It has energy that'll push you out of the turn, as opposed to being divey and taking you further into the turn. So those are the differences that I observed with my riding. One other thing I wanted to point out, which I thought was really cool, and something maybe I'll be able to try in the future, but the reason why this negative rake allows this sideways motion to contribute to the turn is because the deck is above the roll axis of the trucks. So if you were to have a deck that was below the roll axis, so like a double drop or a really aggressive double drop, you could have this same effect with positive rake. And so you could mix this sideways motion with the more lively attributes of positive rake in the same setup. And I don't think I've seen that done before. But it would require a really heavy drop on the deck, which might require really big wheels to keep the deck off the ground. And anyway, it would be a really different setup. So that might be something to try at some point. But anyways, that wraps up my exploration about the positive and negative rake and answers my questions. So there we go. Longboard technology, over and out.